everyone, it's Lisa here. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to paint a peony flower in Procreate. I'll be using the AquaReal Watercolour brushes, and I'll also be using one of the canvases that come with the set, and this one is called the chiffon canvas. So I've gone ahead and done a rough sketch of my flower and just a few leaves. You're welcome to take a screenshot so that you can use it as your base as well, or I'll include a link below that'll take you to my blog where you can download the actual sketch. So the first thing I want to do is just bring that opacity down, probably to 20%, and then just creating a new layer. So we're just going to use the sketch as a rough guide, and you don't have to do it this way. You're welcome to dive straight into painting, but I just like to give myself a little bit of a guide just to help me place my pigment, and where I kind of like to plan my drawing ahead, and that really helps take the stress out of the painting process. So I always prefer starting with a really light color when it comes to watercolor, especially when it comes to flowers. So the reason for that is that we can always build on top of that. We can't really take away so easily, so it's always better to start with a lighter color. So I'm going to start with using the round brush, all-rounder, making sure I'm on that new layer above the sketch, and I'm going to start with the center area here, and I'm going to just roughly kind of follow my sketch, and I'm not lifting my pencil as I work. If you do lift your pencil, that's not a problem. You can always blend those areas. And what I want to do is, when I work for each petal, I kind of want some areas to touch and some areas not to touch, and that mimics real watercolor. Okay, so I'm kind of using jiggly strokes as I work, especially near the edges of my petals. So that's just kind of, you know, working towards that more realistic frilly ends of petals. And please do feel free to turn your sketch layer on and off just to see how you're going. And as mentioned, I'm not lifting my pencil as I work, but I might leave the odd gap here and there, like I did over here. And you'll see I'm not really touching the other petal. This is a kind of stylistic choice. You of course are welcome to blend them. The only thing is, if we blend that all together, it starts becoming difficult for the viewer to discern between the petals. So this is a nice way to keep them separate and kind of build your flower shape. So I'm just using one color as my base, and then we're going to start adding some variation. In the next step, but I'm just getting my petals down for now. Okay, I'm going to turn my sketch layer off and see what it looks like. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. I hope you can see that on camera because it is very, very light. So now we're going to use some stamps and clipping masks to add color variation to our flower and give it a lot more interest and make it look a lot more natural. So creating a new layer, I'm going to set that to a clipping mask. And let's set it to multiply. And I've chosen quite an intense pink. I find using intense colors is better at this stage because we can always play with the opacity of that layer. And I'm going to use one of the stamps. I'm going to start with the round with random blotches. And I'm just going to stamp once. And just kind of play around with placement. So I'm looking to add interest over here. And probably something like that. And what I want to do is I just want to take some of that away and also kind of smudge that. But I think I'm kind of happy with that placement for now. Actually, I like that bit showing a bit more. Okay, so using my eraser, and I'm going to use one of the stamps as well, the bloom stamp. And I'm literally just stamping out just to soften that. But I am leaving some of it because I quite like how we have some of that extra color. And using our smudge tool, I'm just simply going to smudge some areas so that they blend better with our flower. So I'm just going to show you a couple of tricks and I'm going to show you how I approach it, and of course you can decide how much intensity you want to go with. Maybe you like it quite simple like that for now. Maybe you want to build a more richer color. So I'm going to show you the way I would do it, and then of course you can decide how much effect you want to apply to your flower. So we're going to keep creating clipping masks as we go, and I recommend changing the sort of tone of your color, the hue, and I've chosen kind of more of a warmer color, a warmer pink, and this time I'm going to use the bloom blotch stamp. And again, we're just experimenting with size, we're experimenting with placement, and I also like experimenting with the opacity of that layer. I think that actually looks quite nice. And I might add some kind of orange over here. So I'm coming back to my bloom stamp because I find that quite versatile. It's a bit large. And we're just, as I said, experimenting with placement. I might do some smudging and maybe some ink removal here and there. And again, another clipping mask, new layer. This time I'm going to go with quite a kind of pinky, almost purpley color, lilac. And again, just use any, experiment with the stamps, see which ones you like. And you see how it's bringing in that really pinky color to those petals. And that's what we're going for. We want variation in the tone of all the petals because that's more sort of natural to how it would happen, as ink bleeds or paint bleeds with each other when you're painting naturally with, real watercolor. So you want to kind of keep that process in mind as you're working. Imagine what the real paint would do and how it would behave. That really helps me decide how I want the ink to look once I'm finished in Procreate. So that kind of gives me that feeling that the ink's kind of coming from that side, and I just want to darken it a dash by just stamping out. Let's just get a bit of a darker color just on the edge there. So that's kind of where our pigment started bleeding in. And you can really ramp that up, just to show you. We could go really dark on that edge. And then on a new layer, I just want to add kind of stamens in the middle. So using a brownish color and the all-rounder. So this area would be where those little stamens would be sticking out. And I'm just randomly making little brush strokes. You can decide how many you want, how strong you want it. I'm going to go a few more. And then just blend it here and there. Whoops. What are we on? Okay, so I'm going to use the wet blending brush. And I just want to blend some of these to give that impression that they're kind of bleeding into, you know, the watercolor underneath it. And to really mimic that, I'm going to create another layer using that same stamp. It's my favorite stamp. There's no point in changing it if I like it. And I'm just going to, what I'm going to do is on a new layer with a clipping mask, I'm going to stamp once, just using the right size, and bring that opacity down. And what that's going to do is kind of give that impression that those stamens were applied when the paint was still a bit wet. I should have probably made them a little bit bigger, but you get the idea. And what you can do is you can really play around with this area as well. If you want this area to be darker, we can add a much darker color, but I quite like that look that I'm going for at the moment. So I'm going to keep it like that. And then turning on our sketch layer again, I'm going to work on some of the leaves. And again, we're starting with quite a lighter green, coming back to the all-rounder. And same as the petals, we're aiming to not lift our pencil. If you hear funny noises, that's my dog snoring. She's a little snorer. So I'm going to do half first, then lift my pencil, come back, the other half, so that gives it a nice little gap. Again, half of the leaf. The nice thing about this style, you can go quite abstract with your leaf shapes. Okay, that's a bit thick for my liking. And let's do these guys. Okay, so I'm just gonna do these little leaves. Just gonna up my brush And again, we quite rough. I want to kind of give that impression that it was sort of quick painting. You know, we did some quick strokes here rather than precision work, so it gives that looser look to your work. And now we're going to do the same with our flower. We're just going to start building some interesting texture. And on a new layer, clipping mask. So what I want to do is I want some dark areas to come in, and then I want some different color variation. So I'm going to work with the color variation first. So using quite a bright green, I'm starting there, and you'll see that we can adjust the opacity of that brush. Again, using one of the stamps, and I'm just simply going to here and there kind of blotch out some green, and that is quite intense, so I'm just going to bring that opacity down. But what's going to happen is it's giving some variation in that green, which is really nice, and that's what we're aiming for. And then I'm going to work on some darker areas, so you're choosing quite a dark green. Again, we want to make sure that's a clipping mask, and I'm going to set that to multiply because I want that to blend quite well. And coming back to my favorite brush, I'm just simply going to here and there decide how I want to place that. I don't really like that, so I'm going to come to my eraser. We're still on that bloom, so I'm just going to take away some of that. And then bringing this down quite a bit, let's see, what are we looking like? Okay, so I really like that contrast. Again, this is a style choice. I'm just going to turn my sketch off. Whoops. For you, it might be too much. So you can decide whether you want to include something that intense, but I quite like that variation. And then I just want a little bit of color variation over there. So let's have a look. Maybe use the other stamp. Yeah, that's quite nice. And what you can do is you can really ramp up those darker areas if you want some intense contrast in your work. So we can choose a really darker color, again setting it to clipping mask, and I'm going to use the bloom accents just to show you how we can use that brush. I want to set this to linear burn just to see if we can get that color more intense. Yeah, so that's too much, I think. I'm going to clear that. Yeah, I think that's quite nice. Just on the edges here and there, I'm just teasing in some of that color. And maybe what I want to do is have kind of like a dried bit. Again, I'm just showing you all the techniques I use. It's not necessarily something you want to use every time, but I want you to be armed with information rather than not. So using that splotch, let's see if we choose, oops, I'm just going to go once. And you see how we have some of that. I'm just going to set it to multiply to see if it'll intensify. So we have some of that lovely kind of color variation and those stamp edges, which is more realistic when it comes to watercolor drying, and that's what we're going for. And then just finally, I just want to soften that area over here on the petal. So coming back to our stamp that we used, and I'm going to try the accent brush. Oh, that's better. So I've just used the accent brush as my blender, And just here and there, I'm blending some of the hard areas that were too much for me. And you can decide how much you want to, you know, kind of blend in with your painting. And that's it. I hope it gives you an idea of how to tackle watercolor flowers using the AquaReal watercolor brushes. Thanks for watching.